Hi, everybody. This is Nalini Elkins with Industry Network Technology Council. Maybe somebody can give me a quick note to let me know that you're hearing me okay, and we'll get started. This webinar is being recorded. Let me just see if I'm getting, yep, okay, so I guess you're hearing me okay. If you ever have problems along the way, just let me know and I'll see what I can do. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So just a tiny bit about me. I've been working in this area for far too long. No, just kidding. Still get up every morning and ready to hit it, you know. So I guess that's good. So we did our introductory session last time. If you want to go back and look at it, that'll be great, but we're going to go ahead and continue on with some of the other things that we did not cover. And we will have a third session to talk about some of these things also. And then we'll get into some more of the newer stuff. But let's make sure that we understand the past before we go on. So one of the things that people talk about a lot in this whole area is these concepts of forward secrecy and post-compromise secrecy. So let's talk about what those fundamentally are. So again, we've been talking a great deal about keys in this whole area. There's many different kinds of keys. You know, I tell you, I know when I was doing some code for a new messaging protocol, and there were so many different kinds of keys. There's signature keys, there's your symmetric key, there's your asymmetric keys. There's many keys that are involved in cryptography. When we're talking about forward secrecy, by and large, we're talking about the symmetric keys that protect the data. And so what forward secrecy does is, the idea is that you want to protect the past sessions against a future compromise. That is, some hacker gets a hold of your key, then you want to make sure that the sessions that happen in the future are not also compromised. And this is one of the reasons that people really do not like static keys. If you'll recall, last time we were talking about RSA and RSA static keys. A lot of the idea is, even with Diffie Hellman, with keys being static, people don't like that. Of course, we're talking with Diffie Hellman and RSA, we're talking about asymmetric keys. So you know, it's really both symmetric and asymmetric that we're talking about as far as forward secrecy. So what happens, what the best practice is to generate a unique session key every time, and that really means both a unique asymmetric and symmetric key. The signature keys are not necessarily seen as having to be ephemeral at every time. That would be, we'll talk a lot about signature keys in this session. But that would get actually quite awkward if the signing keys also had to be ephemeral. So the idea is if you get a single key, you don't compromise the rest of the sessions that are to come. Then there is another set of algorithms for post-compromise secrecy. And one thing you might do, we'll talk more about this in upcoming sessions, the new message layer security protocol, or MLS. this is the new way that we will be doing messaging in the future. It's very, very important to know that, because messaging apps, such as, of course, WhatsApp, Facebook, and so on, are very widely used. There's some limitations in those. Again, we'll discuss that a great deal in MLS, but it lays out a cryptographic architecture which has both forward secrecy and post-compromise. What that really means is that inherent in the protocol, there's a key healing kind of architecture, so that that post-compromise, then you have key updates done. You might, I'm not going to go into it in a great detail. We'll talk about it more in the MLS webinar, but that's the idea. And feel free to go up to the MLS architecture and learn more about that. So keeping those two things in mind, let's keep progressing. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is the asymmetric key exchange set of algorithms, or public key systems. Public key systems, the idea is that that you can share secrets without both parties having to know what the secret is ahead of time, because because if you had to know what the secret was ahead of time, that would become problematic. In fact, that's how things used to be in the past, is they had actual human beings giving people the keys that they need. And so the protocols around PKI, or public key infrastructure, guarantee that you don't have to send actual human beings. And how they do it is by having a public key that everyone knows and a private key that only the sender knows. And we'll talk a fair amount about that today. The main disadvantage of public key systems, of course, is they're not as fast as symmetric key. And we talked a bit about RSA last time and some of the attempts to break RSA. Let's talk about one of the newer algorithms, which is called elliptic curve cryptography. So the idea is that, in particular with IoT devices, you need smaller keys because they're low power devices and they can't handle the big key sizes. And so the size of the key matters, and the speed with which they are sent matters. And so you'll hear about ECC, or elliptic curve cryptography, a lot. And so very often ECC is used when these small key sizes are required. So what do we really, how does this work? You see here, this is an interesting little picture of a banana with an RFID. There are many, many such kinds of things. People are chipping everything. And when you do that, again, size matters. So let's talk about what ECC really is. And so let's start with some really basic facts, okay? So what we need is a refresher on integers. So integers are whole numbers, and they can be negative, like -4. They can even be 0 or positive. And so, okay, so we have that. And then we need to think about what an ellipse is. So a circle is perfectly round. An ellipse is, of course, oval. And so why do we care about ellipses? Well, because a long time ago, Johannes Kepler proved that planets move in what's called an elliptic orbit, meaning they don't move in circles, they move in ovals. So the science of ellipses is well established. And so the basic formula for an elliptic curve is this. It's, here it is for you. And the point you'll see is that A, B, and C are all integers. And it's a fairly simple algorithm. And in the past, they were used to measure the perimeter and various orbits of planets. So we know these quite well. And so here's a sample elliptic curve. What we're doing is we have the formula, and we plug in a number, -1 for A, 0 for B, and 0 for C. And so then we do a little graph. And so this is a sample elliptic curve. And in the TLS handshake, you'll see a particular extension which talks about which curves are supported. And that's what they're talking about here, is what is the curve that we are supporting. So here's another one. And so what we've done is instead of -1, we've put in 1. And you see when you change the integer, you change the value, the curve looks very, very different. And some more. Well, that's very, very interesting. So what this means is that changing the value creates a very different curve. So this is why it becomes very difficult to calculate what these points are. And so that's what the claim is the security of the elliptic curve is because you can't compute a point on the curve without knowing the original. Now, as we talked about a bit before, all of this becomes problematic once we get quantum computers. We'll talk more about that in the next session. But it's going to be some time before we get that. And today we use ECC a great deal. Let's talk about another kind of key exchange. This is the Diffie Hellman / Merkle key exchange. And this is, again, something we use a great deal. And Diffie Hellman is also a key exchange methodology. In fact, Diffie Hellman ephemeral is what is suggested today for TLS. And so how does this work? How it works in essence is that there's no key that is ever passed over the wire. Both ends calculate what the key is. So that means if you have a connection between a TLS server and a TLS client, only the two ends know what the key is. And this key is ephemeral, meaning that it is short-lived and in fact created for that session only. So let's take a little look at what this, how Diffie Hellman works. And again, you can go up to Wikipedia yourself and take a look. So let's just go through it quickly. So let's say that we have good old Alice and Bob, and they agree on two numbers. They agree to use a modulus. Remember last time we said that modulus was one of those things that was very difficult to invert until you get a quantum computer. And so you get a modulus and a base, and of course you both have to agree that's what you're going to do. And let's, as I say, I'm not going to get into there's a special relationship between these. So let's not get into what that relationship is. And so essentially, again, Alice chooses an integer, and then so she says that I'm going to send you this number A, which is G to the power of A mod P. So for example, if I say A is 6, if I've chosen 6, and then so I say 5 to the 6th mod 23, that equals 8. So then Bob, he chooses another secret integer. He says 15. So he says B is G to the power of B mod P. So 5 to the power of 15 mod 23 is 19. And so then Alice reverses that and she gets 2. Bob reverses that and he gets 2 also. So voila, they now have a shared secret. Here's Diffie Hellman in color, if that it makes it easy. So essentially the idea is by the time you get through sweeping and flopping and everything else, you both have the same common secret. The idea is the key is never passed over the wire. However, by using these formula, you both come up with the same number. And Diffie Hellman is used in many, many, many things. Here's a sample screenshot of choosing Diffie Hellman groups for IPsec. It is, of course, also used for TLS, many other things. So, okay, so then leaving key exchange aside, let's talk about another whole set of protection mechanisms. And this is called digital signatures. So the idea is that digital signatures guarantee, they guarantee authenticity and tamper-proofness. And so the idea is that I want to show that this particular message was not tampered with throughout the transmission, and the message itself can even be sent in the clear, which is quite useful sometimes because symmetric cryptography, encrypting data, can be quite expensive. And so what you may want to do is just say, I'm signing this so that, if you look at the message digest, you can see that this has not been tampered with. So what you do first is you do a digest of the message, and then you encrypt that message digest using the private key. Then you have a digital signature. And so the first step for the message digest is to create a hash. That is, it's a hash function. It's a computation. It takes the message in and returns a fixed size string. The idea is that you want it to be smaller than the message itself, and if you change the message in any way, it creates a different digest. So that's key. One of the things you'll hear about is collisions in this whole space. You'll hear about hash collisions. That means that you took in two different messages and they ended up creating the same message digest. And that is something you do not want. And so once you've got that message digest, then when you get it, you decrypt the digital signature, and then you see, do I get the same message digest? And if you get the same message digest, then you know that the message has not been tampered with. And so So the reason you can be sure of this is that because only the public key can decrypt this digital signature, which was encrypted by the sender's private key. So this is a way of ensuring that the message has not been tampered with, and it ensures integrity. It does not say anything about confidentiality. For example, all it says is, I'm sure that you sent the message, flee at once, we have been discovered. It does not encrypt that message. And again, as I say, sometimes all you want is to make sure that it has not been tampered with. So some of the common message digest algorithms are the MD5 or the MD series. Again, you may remember Ron Rivest from the R in RSA. And these were developed quite a while back. And all of these are really considered broken. That means that people have found ways to either break into them or create collisions. And so the SHA-2 family is recommended. And so what is the SHA family? And so SHA is the secure hash algorithm. And that's where SHA-1 is a revision to SHA. Again, it is another methodology for creating a message digest. SHA-1 is considered broken. SHA-2 should be used. And again, the various lengths are the hash values are 224 all the way up to 512. So whatever works in your method. So another mechanism is what's called a MAC. It's an alternative to digital signature. It's an authentication tag or a checksum. It's also derived with an authentication scheme. But unlike the whole MD5, SHA-1, and so on, they are computed and verified with a symmetric key. So you need to have the symmetric key to decrypt, to verify a MAC. And so there's a number of different kinds of MAC. You may also hear of hash MACs or HMAC, and they use a HMAC. They use a hash function in conjunction with a SHA algorithm. So everything we've been talking about guarantees integrity and to a certain extent the authenticity. But the only thing that this shows is that whoever sent the message has the private key. But that could be Mr. Hacker number 1 or Mr. Terrorist number 2 who has the private key. So how do we actually know that this key is sent by the sender? And so the idea is when you want to require, that's absolutely no doubt, the idea is you use what's called a digital certificate. And a certificate is just a digital document that certifies that this public key is owned by a particular user. And in fact, it's kind of interesting. They're working at the IETF. There's a new key transparency group that has formed, a very interesting BOF at the last IETF. And it's about where to publish public keys so that they are available to everyone. It's a very interesting area of work because currently today the public key is validated by certificates. So it's a great deal of very interesting work going on in the key transparency group. Should be interesting to see how these will relate. So the big thing about the certificate is that it is signed by someone else, and that someone else is called a certificate authority. And the signature for that digital certificate is generated by the CA's private key, which we can validate using the CA's public key. But of course, the problem is a CA trustworthy? And this is something that has come up a fair amount with CAs being impersonated. Most people use very well-known certificate authorities for this very reason, is that you don't want to use some CA which is not validated. And this whole area is somewhat of a nightmare. The whole area of certificates probably deserves like a 3-series set of webinars, because I know I've heard from a lot of enterprises that this is one of the biggest problems they have, is this whole management of certificates. As I say, I'm just giving you a very, very high-level look at the whole thing of certificates. And of course, now that we have Let's Encrypt that has changed how CAs or how certificates are generated and trusted. But you'll see that this is it's a big area. You can also have your own certificate, self-signed certs. The format in which certificates are encoded is called the X509 format, and people complain a great deal about X509. Some of the formats, some of the key things which we'll see in there is the name of the user, the public key, and what algorithm was used, the distinguished name, and what the digital signature for the certificate is. And of course, it doesn't include the private key, which is kept separate. So when you have both the certificate and the private key, these are called the user's credentials. There is also another very interesting draft which has come out at the IETF, and it has to do with how certificates are chained. And I need to look at that draft some more, but it appears to me that certificate chaining will change, and it may change to be put into a Merkle tree. We will discuss in an upcoming seminar ratchet trees, Merkle trees, which are all binary trees, because that whole concept, that whole tree structure is more and more being used in cryptography. It is not yet actively used in the TLS protocol itself, except for, as I say, there is suggestion to use it for certificates. It makes me a little bit nervous to think that there's that many certificates that are chained that we would need to put it in a binary tree. As I say, we need to look at that. But these, as I said, there's some. This is one of the reasons to really attend the IETF and keep up with some of these drafts. Is you get a little heads up about what some of the new potential changes are, and get a little bit of time to get used to these new ideas before they hit you, on your network. So So you'll see things in the X509 cert, which are pairs of values. And so you'll see things like O equals inside product and so on, it's a comma separated list of name value pairs. So when I say this is what is inside the cert. If you remember LDAP uses things like this also. There's a whole bunch of other things that are related to certs, OCSP protocol, certificate revocation list, because the idea with CRLs is that, you may revoke certificates. Say somebody leaves the company, then you want to revoke their certificate if they have a client cert. That's another thing we've not talked about. We'll talk about client certs when we talk about the TLS protocol that in an upcoming session. Because servers can have certs, clients can have certs also. The problem with a certificate revocation list is that you have to maintain it. If you don't maintain it, it's no good. And there is a protocol, OCSP, which is used to maintain the certificate revocation list. And I see it used more and more, OCSP, in the wild, in particular from some of the browsers. You'll see that used a good deal. So now that I've told you all of this, be prepared for changes. So a lot of this what I've told you in the next changes have started already for post-quantum work. The first thing that has started is NIST had to have new cipher suites. Now we have new cipher suites that have been approved. We need to incorporate those into TLS. There are drafts that incorporate TLS. There's a draft for hybrid key exchange. So nowadays, post-quantum key exchange is called classic. So there's classic key exchange and then the newer post-quantum. We also need changes for our certificates. And then all of the cryptographic libraries need to incorporate these new cipher suites and algorithms. And then after that, these cryptographic libraries are called by program functions. For example, in Java, the way you call OpenSSL and create these things is by something called SSL Socket Factory. So SSL Socket Factory has to be changed to use the new methods. And then, of course, the web servers have to be changed, and the application programs. And then if there's anything in hardware, that has to be changed. I tell you something. They don't expect a real quantum computer. As I say, estimates vary. The latest I've heard is 70% of experts think that in the next 10 years there will be one. Definitely later. That number 70% goes up the longer it gets, right? But I tell you something, when you're looking at doing all this stuff, and to be honest with you, even understanding these new algorithms is like, I'm telling you, 10 years is going to be here before we know it. I feel like it's going to take me 10 years to understand the new algorithms in itself. Anyway, so let me take some time for questions now. We'll have session number 3 coming up on May 18th. And the very next session will be for IPv6, where we will talk about some of the encryption, some of the results we've had with extension headers. So we've got some time now for questions and discussions. And so if you have some questions, please feel free to ask, and I can see if I can answer them. Okay, so I'm seeing some questions. Hang on for 1 second. If you want me to unmute you, I can do that also. Okay. So, all right. So there's a question. If you can summarize in very short words, what is post-quantum security? So, okay. So in the idea behind post-quantum security is that some of the key algorithms that we use to protect ourselves rely on the mathematical function. It's a very easy concept, the mathematical concept of hard to invert function. That is, that things like prime number factorization rely, or modulus, the remainder function. You will have to use brute force in order to do it. There's no mathematical algorithm for reversing these things without having a quantum computer. Once there's a quantum computer, you can't rely on these particular algorithms anymore. So new algorithms that do not rely on hard to invert functions have to be developed. And that is the first thing that had to be developed. Is NIST had a series of bake-offs, I'll call them, or requests, so that they could find algorithms which could not be hacked or reversed very easily by a quantum computer. And so that's the first step. And so what post-quantum algorithms do is they take these new algorithms, and that is what's used instead of the standard algorithms we have today. So does that explain what I'm doing? But it's a big step. It's the first step. Once you've gotten these algorithms, then that's step one of getting the algorithm. How do you actually use these algorithms? That's another step altogether, is how to use these algorithms. And I will tell you, I have now started to play around with some of the libraries that implement these new suites. I have a test implementation of experimental implementation of OpenSSL and an experimental NGINX that's post-quantum that is enabled. And I have a packet trace. I'm not saying that I can tell you exactly what that packet trace says today, but there we are. It's I tell you, it's best to start learning about this stuff early. So I hope I answered that question in somewhat understandable form. Please let me know if you have other questions on that, or if there's any other questions. Otherwise, if there's no more questions, then thank you so much for attending. Oh yes, hey Mike. Mm-hmm.
This is Mike. I just want to interject one question, if you think this question makes sense to address now. You've
Mhm.
mentioned a couple of times how, quantum computing is a few years out, maybe even up to 10 years. What happens at
Mhm.
most of us enterprises, if we hear, oh, 10 years, well, then I don't got to worry about that for a few years. So I'm just going to ignore it, which is probably not the right attitude to have and could be dangerous. So is there anything that we should be doing in the next couple of years, year, 2, 3, that would prepare us for activities that we're going to need to do in, let's say, 5 or 6 years to prepare for this horrible thing that's going to happen in 10 years? So I'm thinking, is there any short-term advice that we should take from away from this that we can start thinking about in the relatively near future? Does that make any
Yeah,
sense?
that's yeah, no, absolutely. And no, and I totally get you. It's like, I tell you, I was talking to somebody from a very large organization the other day, and they said, the, when a quantum computer is developed by somebody who is an adversary, or somebody who wishes other people ill, then that will be the real Y2K. It will be a before and after event, and we may not even. Some people are not. I mean, if it's really, it depends on who the adversary is, and if we find out. I mean, we may not even find out that this such an event has happened until it's too late. But I tell you what people who do not wish people well are doing today. And we talked about it a bit last. What organizations are doing today, and in particular with U.S. federal government agencies, is they are keeping track of their traces, their network traffic, because what they're storing network traffic because they can't decrypt it today, but in 10 years they'll be able to decrypt it. And at that point, information from, say, Department of Defense is still valuable. Your Google search for cats may not be. But let's say, for example, I know you work for a health insurance company. Let's say, for example, you have Joe Biden's health insurance data. Will that be valuable in 10 years? Sure. I mean, who knows? That probably would still be valuable 10 years from now. So it's the thing to do right now, though. It's a very interesting question because you can't stop people from doing it. But there are people today who are starting to work on products, and so that's something to look at, is to look and see who is working on products that do what. The best thing to do, though, is to start learning, because I tell you something, is when you're looking at all this stuff to get put in, you might want to put in your project plan that you need in 2 years to have this done. In 3 years, you need to have your applications program working on things. Because if you don't get things into the schedule, it's not going to happen at an enterprise. Am I making sense to you, Mike, as to what I'm saying? It needs to be in your project plan.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, everything made sense, but what you really hit to the heart of the answer to my question was right at the last couple of sentences that you just said, which is getting things into the plan. And we need to understand what needs to be in the plan, and webinars like this help. We have to understand what's going on behind the scenes and how these things work before we even know what to start putting in the plan. But yeah, I think that's getting things into the plan for 2 years out to prepare for something that's maybe even 8 or 10 years out. That's very foreign to us, but it sounds like the right approach here.
No, I think you need to, and I would, frankly, I would build a lab as well. I would build a lab because
there's another great answer. Yep.
because the thing is, it's like I mean, as some, I'm gonna tease everybody. Mike and I are like, there's something really seriously wrong with us. We used to have like, we read packet traces together, and so, but I'll tell you something. I'm starting to look at packet traces with some of these post-quantum algorithms, and I'm like, what am I seeing? Does this make? And I'm like, wait a minute here. I'm going to have to go back into the TLS-1.3 dissector for Wireshark and see what the heck is this doing? Because it's, that we need to understand. I think, to me, I'll tell you something. I mean, for me, I like to understand what the heck is going on. And not everybody needs to understand the exact formula. I'll talk a little bit in the next section about lattice-based cryptography, and that's one of the new algorithms. But at a minimum, understand what's going on. There's a new PQIP group at the IETF, and I'm going to see too, one of the gals who wrote draft, which is going to be adopted for post-quantum cryptography. I'm going to see if I can get her to talk at this webinar. She works for one of the Western docs, and as I say, if I can get her to talk, she's really, I'm just a practitioner. She's a cryptographer. I understand topology. Yeah, am I making Mike about what I'm saying?
No, I was just going to say you have nicely answered my question now, and I'm going to summarize that it's to learn some more from people like you and this lady that you're talking about, to plan ahead and to build a lab. And I understand all that, and that all makes sense to me. The only additional question I'll have from your answers, which always spur additional questions for me, is at a future webinar or some type of event, would it be possible for somebody like you to provide input as to what should go into a cryptology lab that we might want to build? Does that make sense? Because I know, like, we've been advising people to do an IPv6 lab, and then we say, oh, you should have a couple of different end hosts in there. You should have routers. You should have a load balancer and some network management, things like that to make it a realistic test scenario. And then I have no clue what would go into a cryptology lab, and I bet a lot of people are like that. And guidance from you and others would be really helpful there. And I'm not asking you to answer that now, but is that something that could be answerable at a future event or webinar or something?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to put out a disclaimer here. As I say, my lawyer says that if I have a conflict of interest, I need to put out a disclaimer because, I have, of course, I'm president and co-founder, along with Mike and a number of others of of INTC, which is a nonprofit. But I also have a for-profit. And so, again, what Mike is asking is very easy to say. It's not easy to do. And so down the road, my for-profit will be offering classes and consulting for post-quantum crypto, because it's, one, I do have to eat sometimes, and it's harder than you would think to do some of this. As I say, just looking at the first set of quantum crypto, I'm looking at, making my eyes cross, and just the initial set that I've done basically leads me to say, OMG. It's like there's just a lot involved here. I mean, I don't need to tell you, you do this for a living,
Yeah, I try, but no, you're right. There's a lot of OMGs going around, and it's just going to get worse because this stuff is getting more complicated and more difficult to understand. It's not getting easier, it's getting tougher. And so, yeah, if you have classes or anything coming up, I think that would be very helpful, because I mean, my question was, okay, yeah, let's build a lab, and that sounds easy, but we know it's not. And in this case, it's even tougher because we don't know what would go into the lab. And then now, after we figure that out, okay, now we know what goes in there, but how do we implement it, and how do we set it up and define it so that it's going to do everything? So we're going to need a lot of help there. So if you're saying you're preparing to provide help to enterprises in some of those spaces, I think that would be great.
Thank you. As I say, I just wanted to make it clear that, I do have a conflict of interest of that. And unfortunately, I would not be able to do all of that, without in the nonprofit. It has to also be customized to what you need. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all well and good to set up a certain kind of thing, but your organization, your network is quite different from other people's network. And so it's like, some of the things may not apply to you. So, but there's some base things. And I think, frankly, understanding the concept right now, I would say, frankly, spend this year, understanding, understanding the concept. And you've got to go backwards. So this is why it's like, if you didn't understand what the old concepts were, you're not going to understand the new. That's why I've spent this time to say, okay, you guys, let's at least level set to a certain extent, so that, we don't have to say, why is this hash function broken? And what does it even mean for a hash function to be broken? And, the question about why is a quantum computer a danger? And I hope by now you guys are very familiar with the concept of hard to invert and, prime number factorization, because that's the kind of stuff you'll hear in the literature. That you should at least be able to absorb the literature and see what it's saying. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, this is interesting. This is Mike, I'm gonna interrupt for a minute, because there's a very interesting question that's come up. They're saying maybe post-quantum cryptography could benefit through AI token modeling and synthesis. Oh my God. Maybe in a dangerous way. Okay, so that's super interesting. And I will say too, I just started playing with ChatGPT to generate software. Let me just see how it's doing, okay? No, I'm teasing, but okay. So in some ways, what that brings up is actually the other side of it. These algorithms, the original one that was developed by the guys at MIT to break public key or break RSA, essentially prime number factorization. There's huge advances that have been done in that, and I'm going to tell you something. I bet you that if you reduce, it's essentially to reduce the search space of that, and if you can start using AI to do that. I think there's a bunch of questions. This is a war, okay? It's a war both ways. It's a war from the hackers using one set of things, and the other side too. There's another. In fact, the gentleman, Bruce, do you want to? So I unmute you. Do you want to talk about some of this? Let me find Bruce. Yeah. So Bruce, I've unmuted you. If you want to, Bruce is in our Enterprise Advisory Council too. I'll make a pitch for that. If you want to talk about some of the stuff you're talking about in AI, because there's no question that AI will change some of what we're doing. Actually, that seems like a really super interesting webinar too, is AI and cybersecurity. What will be the impact on AI, on cybersecurity of what some of these new things are? I'm going to put that out to some of my cryptographer friends and see if they know, because I tell you, that just makes my head spin, just thinking about all of that. I don't know if that sounds interesting to you guys. I can't say I know what that is. Yeah. So any final thoughts from anybody? Great discussion. And yeah, so thank you guys again. And then I will talk time then. Thank you so much, Mike.
One more comment from Mike is just a thanks to you for doing this session and many like it. These are tough subjects and they're very confusing to a lot of us. And you're making a great attempt to simplify them so to the point that we can understand them, at least to some degree. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, no, my pleasure. And it's, you know, as I say, it's we all need to work together to, you know, because as I say, there's people that are working against us. Anyway, okay, thank you all so much. See you next time.